So welcome everyone. As Linda mentioned, we're going to be focusing on vegetable gardening in containers, but the principles of container gardening applies to other types of plants outside and also house plants and indoor plants. So tonight we'll be talking a little bit about the advantages of growing containers and mention how you can create mini gardens and talk a little bit about the varieties of plants and also containers that are suitable for the different types of plants, different types of containers, mention the importance of location, and also the importance of soil and what's recommended for containers. And lastly, talk a little bit about how to care for your container grown plants. So so why grow in containers? Well, probably the most obvious reason for doing it is lack of space in the garden. And if you have poor soil conditions or have problems with soil-borne diseases, you can solve this by growing your plants in containers. Some other benefits of growing in containers is flexibility. So basically you can grow your veggies almost anywhere, balconies, patios, and like I said before, not only vegetables. And you can see in this picture that there's a wide variety of plants on this deck. So you can put containers almost everywhere, balconies, patios, and decks. And no matter how small of a space, there's always room for a few pots or more. The other benefit is mobility. And unless you have very heavy containers, these can be moved relatively easily and as needed. You can search for the sun, depending on the types of plants that you have or vegetables, and so it gives you a lot of flexibility. And the other nice thing about having containers that you can move is that you can change the scene in your garden by rotating different items just to keep things interesting throughout the different seasons. The other nice thing about growing in containers is that it lends itself to attractive plantscaping. And this is an example of a deck that has been transformed into a nice outdoor space. And what we see here is a combination of different types of vegetables and herbs and edible flowers like nasturtium. And I really like the idea of putting containers on a deck. You can enjoy the plants and you can enjoy the rest of the scenery in your garden. This is another example of a combination of veggies and edible plants that are nice in the landscape. This is a wooden box that has the purple cabbage and nasturtium, which has edible flowers, and a few herbs, like I think sage and some other herbs. Another benefit is the possibility of extending the season. You can move your plants or your crops indoors and pretty much garden year round, especially herbs and fast growing veggies like mesclun and lettuces. And if you have if you're lucky to have a bright, sunny, south-facing window, you might be able to keep bigger plants inside. Next one, like this slide that shows a window that has bigger plants like tomatoes and peppers. As you know, these require much more sun, so you'll need a bright, sunny, south-facing window. And you can keep them for, you know, a longer time. This is a nice example of herbs that have been grouped on a window. And what I really like about this is not only the groupings of herbs, but the matching pots. So you can have this inside, and they look very attractive on your window. And in winter, this looks very cheery. It's really nice to have something interesting and green at that time of year. So one other possibility with container gardens is that you can create mini gardens. And as you can see here on the left-hand side, there's a pepper plant that has been potted with marigolds, with companion plants. And they're planted in a relatively small pot. But of course, if you're gonna have a larger variety of plants, then you'll need something like you see on the right-hand side, a much bigger container. But it makes it very interesting and nice, and you can have it you can plant it in different parts of your garden as long as you have enough sunlight. The next one, the next slide shows a windowsill that has been planted with herbs. And I think there's on the right-hand side, and there's, I think, a tomato plant, cherry tomatoes, maybe. On the left-hand side, you have an example of patio tomatoes. My patio tomatoes plants don't look like that, but and especially not on a small pot like that. I'm sure that they fertilize this plant a lot. But what I was going to say is that I personally do not try to put more than one plant in a pot, because I find it a little bit trickier. If you have plants that grow, some might grow faster than others, and then later in the season you might have problems with some plants competing with the others. So what I tend to do is just use larger pots and just put individual pots. But I do grow a wide variety of veggies, peppers and tomatoes, and but you have the choice of, you know, being creative and doing all sorts of things like we have been showing you here. Okay, so I think
location.
Yeah.
Okay, location's important. Most sun-loving vegetable plants, like eggplant and tomatoes and peppers, they really need 6 to 8 hours of sun. Partial shade is needed by leafy crops like lettuce and cabbage and greens. One of the things you can do, since the pots are mobile, is follow the sun. You know, if you have wheels on your large pots, it's easy to move them from one side to another, or to place them at a place in your garden where they get the appropriate sun. Leafy things that need partial shade, they can tolerate very well morning sun, but they definitely need shade for the afternoon. Basically, any vegetable that you can grow in the garden, you can grow in a pot. As you can see, we like this picture, so we used it a second time. My tomatoes never look like that either, Anna.
Okay.
But you can try most anything: beans, greens, cucumbers, squashes. The trick is having the right size pot in the right location. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. First, let's talk about varieties. Sorry. You have to be careful that you have the right pot for the veggies you're growing. For example, tomatoes. These are a small list of tomatoes that were bred really to grow in pots. Patio is very popular. I see it at the nurseries every season. But there are many tomatoes that would really be too big. They're indeterminate and they just continue growing and growing, and you wouldn't really be able to manage them very well in a small container. So you need to do research on the vegetables varieties that you're going to put in your pot. Make sure you get something that'll do well in your pot, that's not too big, or that your pot's too small. So this list is a partial list of some of the varieties that were bred to be smaller. One of the things you can do is, if you don't see these in the stores, is start them from seeds, or just ask the people who work at the nurseries if they have some recommendations. This has become a much more popular subject, so there's starting to be more research done and more available varieties that are smaller. There's a group that's doing something they call dwarf varieties. So keep an eye out for them. And like I said, do research on the plant before you decide what plant to put in your pot. There's some examples. This is that eggplant is a variety called Dancer. These are Anna's, by the way, from her garden. The next one, the one with the leaves, big leaves, that's a zucchini growing in a pot. And in this pot is a pepper, small peppers. So there's a lot of varieties and there are a lot of things you can do. This is hot peppers, right, Anna? This big red with red?
That's a bell pepper. Yeah,
that's a bell pepper.
Those are very hot peppers.
Okay.
Very productive, as you can see.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the left-hand side, I stuck there and a Swiss chard.
Right. Container selection. You can almost use anything for a container. Plastic or clay pots, that's always been the question. Clay pots tend to dry out very fast, and I don't put my plants directly in clay pots. If I'm going to use a clay pot, what I'll do is leave the plant in its plastic container and then put the plastic container in the clay pot so the plastic can retain water a little bit better than the clay can. But you can use all kinds of things: buckets, baskets, wooden boxes. I tend not to use things that are something that's going to deteriorate very or grow fungus or something. I don't use wooden baskets and wooden boxes. I do use old kettles and jugs and interesting things. Plastic tubs, garbage barrels. Yeah, I like those 5-gallon buckets at Lowe's that you can get, and put drainage holes in them. The trick with the drainage holes is not just have drainage on the bottom, but put holes around the sides about a 1/2 inch from the bottom. So it helps the drainage be more even, because sometimes the hole just in the bottom gets clogged up because the pot is sitting on it. Whereas if you put a little hole around the side every once in a while, it keeps open more. This slide is interesting because the little boy is growing corn in that wine barrel, 1/2 wine barrel, which is interesting. The other side is bags. I use these bags. They're a fiber, porous fiber, and I use them to grow potatoes. And it is certainly a lot easier to do that than to dig and in the garden do potatoes. Because when in this bag, I put a few inches of soil, put my seed potato, and then I keep filling the soil up to the top of the bag as the potato grows. That's been very successful for me. That is a good thing. I've had mine for years too. I wash them out at the end of the season and put them away, and I've used them for quite a few years. This is a strawberry pot, and it has greens growing in it. I like that idea, and I usually put some flowers in mine along with some greens. I've never grown strawberries in them because to me, the strawberries always want to escape, and it's just not enough room for them. Container requirements, big enough to support the fully grown plant, which I've chatted about a little bit. And I told you a little bit about drainage. Keeping them clean is really important, especially at the end of the season. You definitely want to clean your pots out. Use a little bit of bleach, a 10% solution of bleach and water. Especially if you had something like tomatoes growing in them, that they almost always have some kind of disease. You just want to clean your pots so that you don't perpetuate those type of diseases to the next year's crop. We have a list here, and this is a partial list. And in our handout, you'll see a more detailed list where it talks about how many plants would put in a pot. And as you can see, we're talking about 5-gallon pots for the most part. I think it's probably the best way. I have had little success with really small pots. My patio, where I keep most of my containers, is very hot in the summer in July and August. And I think they do better in a larger pot because they need to be watered every day. And sometimes if the pot's too small, not only won't they grow to their full size, but they'll dry out so quickly, and you might end up having to water a couple times a day, which be totally inconvenient. But our handout will have this page, and it will help you gauge how big things need to be.
Yes, so when choosing the type of soil that you're going to use in your containers, there are various possibilities, but it is always recommended that if you are starting seeds, you should use what's called a soilless mix, which is composed of organic and inorganic materials like peat moss, and Quire is the coconut fiber, which is being used more and more, and also inorganic materials like perlite and vermiculite. And these combinations make the potting mix very light and friable, and that's what you want in your containers, so that there's enough air spaces in the soil for the roots to grow and for water to penetrate. Now, there are soil mixes that you can prepare on your own, and what they recommend is 1 part loam or topsoil, 1 part conditioner, which is the fire or compost or peat moss, and 1 part soil lightener, which is the vermiculite or perlite or sand. So these are ideal for containers. Now, these soilless mixes do not have field soil, so they are free of soil-borne diseases. So that's why it's recommended to use these. I personally like to obviously start my seeds using those soilless mixes, but I also grow all my plants in these soilless mixes. And when you use these, sometimes you'll see on the labels of the bags that the soil mix has already fertilizer added, and you see that it'll say, for example, that the plants have nutrients for 8 to 10 weeks. So your plants will, get established, and these mixes will have enough nutrients. Later in the season, they'll need some additional nutrients. And so you can use like a liquid fish emulsion or liquid seaweed, or you can add some compost. And the advantage of using compost is that it adds trace elements to the soil, which you don't find in inorganic fertilizers, like when you buy a bag of Miracle-Gro or some of those others. But I'll talk a little bit about that. What I tend to do is later in the season, I'll add compost to my plants, and usually I have enough compost for my pots. And because what happens is that I'll grow plants that like peppers and tomatoes and eggplants, and they get pretty big. They start to get root bound. So the compost or a little more soilless mix will keep them going throughout the season. Now, the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about other alternatives. If you use inorganic fertilizers, like I said, it's recommended to use a water-soluble fertilizer and a balanced fertilizer, like a 20-20-20, which means that you have 20% of nitrogen, 20% of phosphorus, and 20% of potassium. Now, again, these inorganic fertilizers do not have trace elements. So that's why it's recommended to use a little bit of compost or some of the fish emulsions. In terms of how much to fertilize, you have to be careful not to over-fertilize. So, for example, plants that are still small or have mature, use about half of a tablespoon per gallon of water weekly. So when you water your plants once a week, you add a little bit of fertilizer. Once the plants are mature, you can increase that by half a tablespoon, and again, add it to 1 gallon of water per week. You can also use slow release fertilizers, and I sometimes do that at the end of the season. And these are the pellets that you can buy. And I prefer to use that because they're, as it indicates, it's, you know, the fertilizer is released much slower. So there's less chance of over fertilizing your plants. Thing I want to mention a little bit is watering, and as you know, and as Linda mentioned, plants in pots will tend to dry much faster than those that are in the ground, and so you need to really be aware of that. There are ways of avoiding plants to dry very quickly. You can put mulch on top of on the surface. You can put an irrigation system, you know, the drip irrigation into your pots, and that way you'll have a constant supply of water, or just inserting a wick cord into the pot and having a water reservoir. There are these water absorbing gels that are sold in the market, and the idea is that they retain moisture. I have never used those. I have read that it's a little bit tricky using these gels, but they are available, and some people really like them. So that's, you know, another alternative if you feel that your plants are getting very, very dry very quickly. I usually, you know, my plants are on my deck, so I go out there every day and I check my plants on a very regular basis. So lastly, I would like, and Linda already mentioned, you need good drainage in your pots. You can put broken pottery charts on the bottom, and but especially in the middle of summer, you really have to be on the lookout for your plants. The other thing I want to mention is pest control. And in terms of diseases and pest control, it's basically the same as in your outdoor garden. And some of the tips or tricks to help you with unwelcome pests. Keep your pots clean, and it's always recommended to water at the root level, and do not water the foliage because it prevents the spread of diseases. If you have problems with certain bugs, I usually just handpick them. I don't find that I have very many problems with my plants on my deck. But if you have bugs, spray with soapy water, or dust your plants with cayenne pepper powder. I always say that it's better to be on the lookout for pests before they get to a point where you can't control them. So I look for the eggs on the underside of the plants, of the leaves of the plants, or if you start seeing the juveniles, the larvae, then it's much easier to control before before the adults show up. So I find that growing plants in containers is very easy, but mostly it's very, very rewarding when you see a large crop of tomatoes or peppers and in such a small area. So I have been doing more and more container gardening because my garden is getting shaded, and so I find that I have enough sun on the side where I have the deck that I can really grow my veggies there. It can be challenging, especially in the middle of summer and July, August, when it is so hot. But I think it's really worth trying. So I hope you enjoy gardening containers, and happy gardening. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to try to answer some of them or all of them if we can.
All right. Well, with that, we want to thank everyone again, and glad you were able to join us, and look forward to seeing you in the future.
For more information about gardening, our Master Gardener workshops, or to become a Master Gardener, visit us here.